Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about 5 different zoonotic diseases that your pet can actually pass on to you. The first disease that we're going to actually talk about is rabies. Rabies is a legally required vaccination for your pet, especially if you're going to license them, which you are supposed to do. Rabies is fatal once symptoms show, and your dog or cat can actually show symptoms of fever, excessive drooling, and even aggression. Not only can it be transmitted through a bite wound, which is how it's usually transmitted, but open wounds. So if your dog has rabies and they lick your open wound, you have a chance of contracting it. If you think your pet has been exposed or your pet was bit while it was outside to an unknown animal, it's extremely important to have your dog or your cat have their rabies booster, even if they were up to date. And if they weren't up to date, they most likely will need to go through a quarantine stage. And that's something that you can discuss with your veterinarian. Now, if you feel that you were exposed to your pet that potentially could have rabies, or even an outside wildlife animal that you feel that may have rabies, it's extremely important to talk to your doctor or go to the nearest emergency room to get prophylaxis vaccinations. The second one we're going to talk about is leptospirosis. The great thing about this is there's also a vaccine for it. So leptospirosis is actually a bacteria that's transmitted through wildlife urine. So your pet doesn't always have to just lick urine off the ground to contract it, but they can actually walk in it, or even if it's drinking in puddles and stuff like that, if it's in there. And this can actually cause kidney and liver failure in your pet. And a lot of times it's contracted to people when they're cleaning up the urine in the house, but not always fully washing their hands afterwards. The good thing is there is a treatment, and it's antibiotics and supportive care. Although it may not be on the lower end of the cost range, at least your pet could survive it. You will have to go to your doctor if you feel that you are exposed or are having symptoms of it. And don't forget, there is a vaccination for it. The third thing we're going to talk about is roundworms. Roundworms is actually an intestinal parasite that's extremely common in puppies. So it's very important that when you bring your puppy in for their first visit, they do get a deworming, even if their stool sample was negative. The gross part about it is you can actually see sometimes the worms in their stool, and they actually look like spaghetti. Dogs will sometimes vomit when they have such a large worm burden, and you might even see them in their vomit. To diagnose it, obviously we need a stool sample, and unfortunately, even if the sample is negative, they can still have it. And that's why I always recommend general dewormings for puppies and yearly dewormings for adult dogs. The great part is if your dog is on heartworm prevention, most of them actually prevent against roundworms, and your dog should be getting that monthly. So your dog should be protected. Now, the most common way for this to actually be transmitted to a person is through a fecal-oral route. And what that means is whether you're cleaning up the poop or whether their butt is dragging along the couch and you touch it or something like that, if there is an egg in there that you will not see because it's microscopic, and then you put your fingers in your mouth, or it somehow gets transmitted to your mouth. Adults, this is much less common, although with children, it definitely can happen because they're always sticking everything in their mouth, including their fingers. So it is important to encourage your children to wash their hands after touching their pet, just so that way we can get in that habit for good hygiene. But it is also important to make sure you take your puppy to the veterinarian and even your adult dog for yearly vaccines and general checkups. Now, with people, it can actually migrate to their eyes and sometimes can cause blindness. So it's definitely important to protect you and your family. The fourth one we're going to talk about is ringworm. So ringworm is not a worm. It's actually a fungus. And it's most commonly seen in cats, but can also be seen in dogs. And if your pet is diagnosed with ringworm, they'll typically have skin lesions, but your veterinarian can actually look at it and determine if they believe that it's ringworm. There are also different fungal tests and even the black leg test that they can use to determine it. Now, if your pet has ringworm, you are automatically at risk of contracting it because the spores from the ringworm are basically left where the pets lay. So good house cleaning in your house, good cleaning of your house is important, and also washing your hands frequently. On top of that, if you or anyone in your family has symptoms or notices any lesions on you, it's important to go to the doctor to have them look at it to make sure that's what it is. Ringworm is easily treatable as long as it's caught early. Some animals that I've seen have had long treatments of oral antifungals, but typically topical medications work for this. And the last one we're going to talk about is Giardia. Giardia is another parasite, and typically dogs contract it when they lick or sniff, which is kind of strange, the cyst version of the parasite. It's diagnosed by a test that's done in hospital, or sometimes it has to be sent out to the lab. Now, this will actually cause watery diarrhea in your dog, and it'll be a mess. On top of this, you can contract it when cleaning up their stool. So again, good hygiene is super important with this. It's easily treatable. Sometimes we use antibiotics. Other times we use a deworming with it. And sometimes we have to use both. Sometimes, if the diarrhea is super bad, they may need supportive care also, just to make sure that they're hydrated. It's important at home to clean up after your pet wherever they go, so that way it has the decreased chance of you contracting it, or maybe if you have another dog, them getting it also. If your pet has it and you start to develop some foul, watery diarrhea or even get some weight loss or vomiting, it's important you go see your doctor. Now, obviously, these are not the only diseases that your pet can give you, but these are 5 diseases that we see very commonly in practice, and it's important for you to know about them. If you have any other diseases that are zoonotic, you can always drop them in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so every time I drop a video, you get a notification.